Hi, seventh graders. I would like to talk about the TDA for you and see what you think. This screen that I'm sharing with you talks about the TDA. And one of the things that we have to do is if you've already read the prompt, it was called the sewing community. And that was the group of people, if you remember from the actual prompt about the people putting the garden in and everybody having their own edibles. And here we go. And it talks a little bit about make sure you read the prompt carefully. Well, the prompt says the Passage Sewing Community focuses on family participation in an art project. Well, it was a garden, if you remember, and writing an essay analyzing the effect that the edible landscape, that was with the things that were in the artistic garden that could be eaten and put in for vegetables and salads and that kind of thing. Use evidence from the passage to support your response. Well, you have to read the prompt carefully. So we are talking about the sewing community, focusing on who participates. It says focus on families' participation in an art project. So write an essay analyzing the effect that the edible landscape project had on the community. So did the community like it? Were the children involved? Were the parents involved? Did everybody get along? And we have to kind of think about what was that passage about. So let's go back to the passage and let's look at it and let's see what's going on. It's called Sewing Community. A lot has changed in the next 10 weeks since the Shower family allowed a crew to tear up their entire front lawn in Woodbury and replace it with edible plants. Instead of a flat expanse of turf grass, the family's front yard is now mounded and thick with growing cabbages, tomatoes, salad greens, peppers, herbs, fruits, over 100 crops in all, if you include different colors. So when you remember this, I remembered the purple cauliflower from the article. And then it talked about how busy making salsas and pestos and juicing. So the dad said also we're eating more lettuce. You know how salad is, right? Catherine then said that they had gardening nights and they were gathering the community. And then they hosted a pizza party and they probably made a veggie pizza, I'm assuming. And the kids attended a home-based childcare facility across the street. They visit in the children's garden, so it involves all spectrums of people. So as I'm going ahead and I'm taking a look, I'm going to find examples from my article, and I'm going to use those when I go ahead and start to write. So it says, make sure you've read the entire passage carefully and think about how the prompt relates to the passage. Sewing Community focuses on the family's participation in the art project. Well, it's kind of nice to hear Dad saying he was making salads and juicing and that kind of thing. So I analyze information from the passage as I write the essay, use evidence from the passage to support my response, use precise language, a variety of sentence types, and transition to the essay, and organize your paper with an introduction, body, and conclusion. So did I write my essay in the answer booklet? Did I stay focused on the response in the prompt? Did I use evidence from the passage to support my response? And have I corrected as many errors as I can find in capitalization, spelling, sentence formation, punctuation, and word choice? So a lot of times, if you're using a booklet, you'll end up with a piece of paper like this, which has lines, which you have to continue to write your essay. And they'll give you enough that you can write a 5-paragraph essay, or a TDA, which has to be at least 5 paragraphs and into a 3rd page. Now, your TDA is scored with 4 points. So the 4 is the highest score it can get, effectively addressing all parts of the task. It can also get a 3, which means it adequately addresses all parts of the task. 2, which means it inconsistently addresses, and 1 mean that it minimally addresses. So let's take a look at some of the tasks that were done that scored a low score. And then we can see what students do when they really don't understand the prompt very well, or when they have too much trouble trying to talk about the prompt and putting it into their essay. So I scrolled all the way down to a 2. All right, so let's look at the 2. The edible garden has affected the community by bringing them together. For example, adults get to know each other better. And in the passage, it says, we always had a close neighborhood, but neighbors I didn't know as well, I know better now. Another example is the children are getting to to it. In the passage, it says kids who attend the home-based childcare facility across the street regularly visit the children's garden, a cozy plot tucked into the corner of the shower's front yard. Lastly, it is getting people in the neighborhood to come together. And in the passage, it says Catherine has organized Wednesday gardening night so neighbors can gather, pull a few weeds, and help themselves to produce. This is how the Shower family's edible garden has affected the community. In the passage, Sewing Community focuses on a family participation in an art project. Write an essay analyzing the effect that the Edible Landscape Project has on the community. Now, if you notice, how many paragraphs did this student write? One giant paragraph. That is definitely not going to get a 4. That is definitely not going to get a 3. And although there's examples, it's only going to get a 2. How did this kid only get a 2? Because he writes one paragraph and gives a couple text examples in one paragraph. Now, let's take a look at the one and see what happened here. The effect that the Edible Landscape Project had on the community was how the Shores' front yard was like a farm, and that their front yard had plenty of produce because they had so much neighbors who were allowed to come over and pick up some crops from their front yard. And when they had too much of things, they gave them away. And when they needed help pulling weeds, people came over and helped. And little kids would come over and eat things that have never ate before, and they would go home and try to eat their parents' hostas. And the Shores kids would come over often to help. And like their son Aaron comes over to help build trellises, lashing for their plants. Their daughter Andrea eats and blogs about the chronicles of the family's journey. And a 9-year-old girl who lives across the street from the Shores is a frequent garden helper and consumer. And other neighbors are planning to install their own landscape. Now, this student only gets a 1, and we have the 1 paragraph issue, but we also have a kid that's talking about a lot of other things other than the focus on the participation of an art project and talking about the effect that it had on the community. So what's important is we have to start out with the prompt itself and making sure we're sticking to the prompt, because the student that wrote the 2 or the 1, although they were trying, did not have a good sense of the prompt and were not able to put the prompt into that perspective. So we're going to look at a 3, which exactly does a pretty nice job with this particular prompt. The passage Sewing Community focuses on a family's participation in an art project. Write an essay analyzing the effect that the Edible Landscape Project has had on the community. Use evidence from the passage to support your response. So we look at the Shores have gotten the experience to have their front lawn turned into a garden full of abundant amount of edible plants. The garden is part of Fritz Haig's residency at the Walker Art Center, and the Art Center is starting an exhibit similar to this, and it will include the premiere of a film about the family's front lawn renovation. Now, what this kid did differently here is actually took a general to specific introduction and gave some background information about what this was about. The Shores Garden has greatly affected the community in various ways. The Edible Landscape has not only brought the community together, but encouraged the neighbors to lend a helping hand. Very nice analysis of talking about how the landscape has not only brought the community together, which is what the prompt asked you to do, but it also encouraged neighbors to lend a helping hand, and that's how the community gets involved. The Woodbury community has been greatly inspected by the Shores' redone front yard, and with the help of the garden community of Woodbury, they brought closer together, and all the neighbors are getting to know each other much better. They're also talking with each other more and spending time together. The people of the community are going to parties thrown by Catherine Shore in the Edible Landscape too. Community members are also lending a helping hand towards caring for the garden, and tending for the garden has become much easier with the help of others. Neighbors are also encouraged to take some fresh fruits and vegetables home with them because there are so many helping hands. The garden has continued to flourish and grow. And the Edible Landscape has greatly impacted the community in many ways, and the garden has brought the community closer, and it has also encouraged neighbors to lend a helping hand towards caring for the garden. And the Shore family believes that the edible landscape is really a good thing, and that is the future. More people will be interested in getting one. Now, if you notice, this student just explained how the garden um, affected the landscape and the effect it's had on the community. Notice that everything is paraphrased about it, and there are no direct quotes, but there is a nice explanation about how the community got involved. So this is a very nicely done paragraph piece that would get a 3. What it's missing is text evidence. So if this had further text evidence like the 4, then it would get a 4, and that's the difference in the analysis. So I'll go back to the 4, and if you notice, what makes it better is its text evidence. So that's the problem and why this very nice piece doesn't get a higher score. The reason that this 3 stays at 3 is because it did not use direct text evidence. So a TDA can be well written, but not get a 4 unless it has text evidence, quotes from the piece. Well, that sums it up for today's tips for PSSA grade 7. Good luck. And we will see you next week with a close look at a 4 and what makes it so good.